This episode is going to start a little differently, and unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit longer because of it. Typically, when we warm up to record, we shoot the shit for a little while in order to get more comfortable. Sometimes we get a cold open that I like, and sometimes we just get right into the topic. This time, however, we have a gaming story that leads into a topic that doesn't directly relate to the episode, but it does include content that I didn't want to completely get rid of because it has some good advice in it. So this will be a little bit more of a peek into what exactly Jordan is thinking whenever he DMs. Most of the time, I feel like on podcasts like this, we don't hear enough about what a DM is thinking and feeling as it happens in a game. And so rather than throw out all of this content that I feel is very good, I decided to keep it in. I hope you all enjoy this direct insight into our ongoing game. So how did the rest of the night go? Was the combat the entirety of the night, or was there other stuff that happened?
No, the combat did not last long. So we picked up like the round that everybody realized, oh shit, Pistachio dropped. Like, we got to get the fuck out of here. Feanor picks him up and runs down the hallway, right? And then that was curtains for the last session. So we picked up right at that. I had a minute where I explained to everybody how encumbrance works and how it affects your movement, and I gave everybody the opportunity to adjust their character if need be, given that knowledge, right? So some people fiddled around with it or whatever, and movements were what they were. So I did a round of initiatives. Everybody's moving at like 3, 6. Like that's the movement rates people are at, because everyone's still fucking loaded down. And so they make their movements to get away, and this troll is just long striding with its fucking, 6 foot long legs or whatever at a full movement of 12, and just runs down Feanor, rips him to shreds. Everybody freaks out at that point, and at that Y intersection, or that T intersection, half the party runs north, half the party runs west. They're just running for their lives. I rolled randomly to see what the troll would do. I rolled that he was happy with his kill, so he turns around and was trying to sneak up and heal Feanor, who's laying there bloody. That was his plan if the troll pursued northward. But the troll just picked up Feanor's body and marched back to its lair and just added Feanor to his feed pile. The rest of the group's like, fuck, what are we going to do? So they all met up finally. Took forever to hatch a plan.
Forever.
So long. Went around and found some other random spatial distortion that was like a stairway that goes on forever, and then when you turn around to return, it's like 5 minutes to get back. So that like didn't go anywhere. It was just another weird feature of that dungeon. And finally it occurred to like, I think he's like, hey, isn't Robert the Bald a evoker? Oh yeah, let's go ask him for some help. So eventually they like reset the ambush in the hallway the way they wanted it to be, and lured the trolls into that hall, and Robert was standing behind him, and like 2 fireballs later and it was over with. Man, I thought for sure when I set that encounter up for those trolls, like, okay, they're going to spot the trolls, they're going to sneak away very quietly, and they're going to go get their fucking evoker, like, archwizard buddy to come down here, because those trolls are positioned in a perfect situation for a surprise fireball.
Well, I will say that's something that it's the length of time that it's taking us, because we're all so unfamiliar with the system. And I like that we have the caller or whatever. I like that we have that rank system. But at the same time, like, I don't know, it just seems like it takes us forever to figure anything out. We're very timid. And at certain points, usually when Feanor, like, would go off and do something rash, it's just kind of like, I'm bored. I'm tired of bullshitting. And I'm like, I'm the tank. Fuck it. I'll run in the room. Or, fuck it. Let's just go attack the stupid worm thing. It's like, let's just do something. You know what I mean? But I feel like constrained a little bit because I'm not like the ranked member, whatever. And then the one time I gave pushback in the first couple of sessions to the power structure, basically pulled rank on me and was like, well, you got a problem, soldier. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, that really didn't bother me that much, but it just reminded me that like the system does have like a tie-breaking chain of command. So, well, fuck it. I guess I'm just going to wait till the people who have higher rank than me figure something out. And then it takes 1,000,000 years.
That's a problem. I'm going to have to figure out something to do about that.
Just give us a timer. Start setting things in terms of like, this is a decision point. I'm setting a 5-minute timer. I'm going to act it regardless of what you guys are doing at the end of that time.
I was listening to a D&D podcast, and a guy was talking about this exact issue, and what he chose to do is he has a watch sitting in front of him all the time. At every 15 minutes, real time, if nothing else is going on, he makes a wandering monster roll.
I like that. I like the idea that after so much like in-game and real life time, just the situation changes.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to do that.
So how does that work? Since my character's new to this, he's not even like a part of the company or whatever. I guess it's not completely in-game, the chain of command thing, but I'm going to try to play this guy as more like an agitator. You know, I'm not in your crew kind of guy, like not in a bad way, but just like to help push people forward. Where Feanor was like originally set in the chain of command, like I definitely played him like a character who waits for orders. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you guys as a group are in the middle of a transition where you're kind of going from, what was the company from Band of Brothers? Was it Easy Company? Is that what they were called?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're transitioning from like an easy company, like we're part of this big regular army doing our thing kind of situation with a clear chain of command, over to more like a Blackwater kind of scenario, because the Crusade's over and God knows what's going on in Blackmore, but you're not really part of the Crusader army anymore. You're part of the Blackmore regiment. And depending on what the leadership there says, spoiler alert, shit's going to go down and you guys are going to be a free company. You all are literally going to be a private corporation of mercenaries. And so how the hierarchy works out there is between y'all.
Well, yeah. I mean, and a lot of times, you know, situationally, I think partly just where we're mapping, I don't know, just I think everybody's hyper aware that the system is fairly lethal at low levels, and this is no complaints. I don't mind a low level game, but it's also worth, you know, in the back of our heads, I'm sure I've been like, well, it's what are we going into session 10?
Yeah.
And we've not leveled, correct?
Leveled, and everybody is on the brink of leveling. Well, here's another thing. Y'all are used to this fucking 5th edition, like, you know, milestone or whatever kind of like, you know, hand-wavy, loosey-goosey leveling shit where, oh, it's been 3 sessions, I deserve my level by now. That's not how this goes. You earn your fucking levels by getting shit done in a session, and I keep track of that meticulously. So when you guys are just wandering around picking your asses in a hallway, that's a whole evening that no experience is getting generated. Like, for this last session, you know, for the 2 trolls you all killed, that was a little bit of XP, but that was set off because it was really a high-level wizard that was helping you. So I had to divide that a little differently than if y'all had done it on your own. In addition to that, I was, like, really scratching my head, like, what the fuck can I award some XP for to these guys? They just spent a whole session. The best I could come up with is an individual XP award of like a major event in their lives where everybody that survived witnessed their friend Feanor dying. So that was a pretty decent chunk of XP because it was a momentous event. But aside from that, like, what's your fucking accomplishments?
We're dangerously close to the topic of today's you want to continue this conversation in the podcast?
Yeah, I was hoping we were warming up here.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com, We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are going to be kind of going into the Wayback Machine for Dungeons & Dragons and talking about some of the past ways that character limitations were a major expected part of the game, and a part of the game that everybody agreed upon was something that they were going to work within the confines of the system, which I think I can speak for the other people on the podcast and say that that's something that we feel that has been definitely removed in a lot of ways from the game in the current edition.
Yeah, for sure. My feeling, this is my idea to this topic. So what I wanted to kick around with you guys about this is how you feel about what limitations might actually do for the game. Like, I get the impression from modern Dungeons and Dragons that limitations are thought of across the board as a bad thing. I am not so sure. I'm pretty convinced of the opposite, that limitations are pretty important, and that other systems that have less limitations, I feel like have less character to them than ones that do. We can compare some notes and stuff on different systems and stuff if you like, but I don't know. That's just generally what I was thinking. I just wanted to do my best to make a coherent defense for the concept of limitations, character limitations in a role-playing game.
I very much agree with the vast majority of that. I think that one of the worst ways you can introduce a new player into tabletop role-playing games is to tell them that you can do anything. Because if you don't know what the bounds of the in-world reality are, how do you even begin to come up with a character that you want to play with the idea that you can do anything and you don't know what you can and cannot do?
Yeah, it's sitting down to watch a Netflix movie. Like, you can watch anything. All right, well, there goes the next hour of my life searching to figure out how to constrain that.
I feel compelled to be the contrarian, though. As Clayton said, I mainly agree. I mean, in a way, this is maybe the most important conversation or consideration that a dungeon master has to have. I do think that it's not a one-size-fits-all conversation, because there are different types of DMs, and there are different types of way people go to approach game creation. And I feel like I'm a little bit on the opposite side, in that when I sit down to run a game, I'm always in the back of my head usually inspired by telling a story or giving, showcasing a world that I've been working on or something like that. And so I do think that it's important for any game to give players something to work towards. But when it comes to actually the power curve of the players, which is kind of how I'm hearing this, I do think that it's a delicate balancing act when you have, say, a very limited lethal starting point. It can be difficult to walk that line, because we were discussing before the pod that in the game that you're running right now, I feel like one of the issues we need to address is that everybody is very slow to make decisions, which was kind of a surprise to me, because it even has a built-in mechanism to kind of push the story along. In the original early Dungeons and Dragons, they had like a rank system. What's it called, Jordan?
Well, you've just got one particular role called the caller, who is the go-to spokesperson. They're the liaison between the dungeon master and the rest of the group, so you don't get bogged down in a huge conversation of what do you do, what do you do, what do you do.
Yeah, but it's based off of, it's a statistical basis, right? So it's the person with the highest charisma?
That is just the way that I determined it randomly at the beginning of the game. That's how I assigned it. There's no real guidance in the original systems for how to choose a caller out of your actual players. So
okay.
That just made sense to me. The player character with the highest charisma would be the leader.
That makes sense to me too, but to back myself out of the weeds a little bit, I've been surprised at how paralyzed the party has been, and I think it's because first editions have a strong reputation for being very deadly, and yet we're in session 10, and we just lost our first party member, and so to me, what that tells me is that there's a bit of paralysis, I think, going on in our game because we are so fearful of the world. And though we've had experiences in the past where we've been in combat and been successful, I do think that once you get down in that dungeon, say you're in a dungeon crawl and it's going to be kind of a challenging situation, I just think that if the world's very lethal or the characters are very limited or maybe both at that early stage, it can be intimidating and almost paralyzing for decision making because players tend to want to hold on to their characters,
I think a lot of the issues that we are currently experiencing in the game is more due to basically the problem of character limitations being completely inverted. And here's what I mean by that. The way I see D&D 5th edition, the way that it is most often played, the way I see it is you are basically making characters who really don't have limits on them, but then once the character gets made, you have this big long list of abilities that you can do, and my experience is that by default, most players will look to that character sheet in order to try to find the solution to the problem that they are being faced with. However, in this current game that we're playing, we were very limited whenever we were creating our characters. We had stats limitations, we had class and race limitations. And now we are playing the game, and in this game, Jordan, you as the DM, you are handling pretty much all of the rules behind the DM's curtain. And so as our characters are trying to come up with the solutions to all of these problems, the solutions are not on our character sheets. And it's a very, very drastic change in the way that we've got to view the problems and come up with solutions to the problems. And I think that is the majority of the issues that we are running into with like decision making being just taking so long because we don't have that guidance of having a specific list of abilities on our character sheets that are designed to handle particular problems.
That's a consideration that's very worthy. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I guess to be clear, it's not like you all can't see your character sheets. Your character sheets are there. Everyone can look and see exactly what your scores are for this, that, and the other thing. The rules are also not a mystery. That's also all available. The difference is that the players are not rolling their dice. We're worrying about putting together all the math to find the result of their rolls, and all that back and forth, asking for target numbers and blah blah blah. Rather, that's all being handled by me after someone tells me what they want to do. And for anyone listening who has never tried this system, I've never tried it before, but this is apparently how many of the OG D&D players did it way back when. I highly recommend giving it a shot. You save a lot of time in the clunky verbal communication back and forth of talking out math problems with each other, and it doesn't change anything. Like the statistics of the situation are all the same, and if you've got the player characters sheets in front of you, which we're sharing everything over Google Docs, it's just instant. And from the feedback I've gotten, people seem to find it more immersive. However, it sounds like you guys weren't quite ready to be this immersed if I'm hearing you right.
What I'm kind of referring to is like in 5th edition, players will have their character sheet in front of them, and they'll be presented with a problem, and so I will instinctively go down through, okay, let's see, I've got maximum in my Arcana skill, and I've also got this this background ability that allows me to have an additional piece of information. So can I roll an Arcana check, and can this special ability give me advantage on that roll? And like that kind of negotiation, I feel like, is what you're kind of talking about, that exists with the current editions of the game versus what we are currently playing, where it's, yeah, you've got a list of abilities, but you don't have all of that granular information of all of these specific abilities that come into play in certain situations. We don't even have a list of skills in play at the time of recording where we can call on these abilities to be used in a particular situation. It's just, okay, we've encountered this thing that we are pretty sure is a trap. I will narratively describe all of the things that I am going to try to do in order to beat this trap, and then DM will do all of the calculations as to what all will go into that, what all will affect the roll, and then the DM will just let us know what the result is.
Yeah, I am about to introduce a skill system just to make things easier, because eventually, I think every system needs them. The fact that they had to introduce the thief in the very first supplement of original Dungeons and Dragons, a completely skill-based character, I think speaks to that clear lack in the very first original Min and Magic product. But anyway, just to circle it back to the topic at hand of limitations, I think that one thing that I'm trying to do that I hope is jives with my thesis of limitations being a good thing, is that in the mode of play, which, I mean, it sounds like you guys are kind of suffering from this, so maybe I'm completely wrong, but in the mode of play of like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and every edition of D&D I've played since 3rd, has been a bunch of maniacs kicking in every door, blowing their spells and powers and whatever as quickly as possible, and basically playing like some medieval Call of Duty type of game in their head on a grid, and kind of knowing in the back of their mind the whole time that this thing is built for them to win, and that this is just like a free-for-all power fantasy for the fuck of it. And what I want to play around with more is, I mean, you know me, with Apocalyptia and all this other shit, like, I love survival horror kind of stuff. I like that gritty, like, edge of your seat, tension. And the best way that I know to do that is to limit the amount of punishment that a player character can take before they drop. And goddamn if that isn't proving to be the case for probably the first time in my memory, except for that game that I ran that you mentioned a few episodes ago, where everyone was playing Padawan Jedi running from Anakin during Order 66. Aside from that, last session was the first time that I have seen a group of player characters strapped and ready for battle run the fuck away. That was awesome. No roll, no morale roll. There was no mechanical like thing forcing them to, oh, you lost your nerve and take off. People just fucking ran.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's go to a good example to the contrary. I think, and my experience with 4th edition was very limited. I played it one time, so I heard a lot of complaints about it. I only got to experience it. But, when the limitations of players get really, fudged, I'm trying to think of, that would be the system that I would think of, where there's a lot of overlap, even though it doesn't seem like there's a lot in common with fighters and magic users. Everybody had powers that essentially acted as their magic abilities, and the way that every character actually worked, be it martial skills or arcane or what have you, it all felt very samey, and so it kind of broke down that barrier of one player having distinct uniqueness, and that to me is what when I think of limitations, what I want in a game and how it sets up its limitations is the limitations first and foremost for a player, I think, demarcates their own authority and their usefulness and utility in the game. And so if you don't have a game that's very well chopped up, I think that you can, anyway, that's kind of what I look for when I think about, whether a system, does the system create good differences between players so that what they do is special and unique and gives them their moment during the course of a session. And whenever limitations aren't done well, I don't really think of it. Sometimes when there's not a lot of limitations, it doesn't. This isn't really speaking to how lethal the system itself can be. I more think about a good system that has good limitations allows for each player to feel special. Does that make sense? So right there, limitations are essential.
I would like to get some clarification on what exactly we're talking about when it comes to limitations, because I feel like there's two very distinct styles of limitations, and we really haven't defined that very well. The two styles that I have seen are basically expressed as an in-genre restriction, and then there is a mechanical restriction. And using 4th edition as an example of this, 4th edition absolutely had mechanical restrictions in that each character had a particular suite of powers and things that they could do. And if you wanted to do something that wasn't on that list of powers, particularly in combat, you just couldn't do it. If you didn't have the specific encounter ability or encounter power that allowed you to do a particular thing, you just couldn't do it. Whereas in the genre of this game that it was emulating, it was wide open, the types of things that you could do in combat. In particular, I'm thinking about the ability to disarm an enemy. In 4th edition, if you didn't have a power that specifically said you essentially disarmed them, which in 4th edition terms might be a stun ability or something like that, or take away their attack ability for a round. Compare that to in 3rd edition, where there were mechanical restrictions, but they were trying to reflect genre expectations in their restrictions, where a druid had to be of a neutral alignment in order to even be a druid. If you were a lawful good character, you absolutely could not be a druid.
Yeah, and I think those are important distinctions to make between those two kinds of limitations. I for one think that the more world building, flavorful kind of limitations, stuff like paladin alignment limitations and behavior limitations, like monks being limited in how much loot they can have. Why do elves get training in bows and blades? Why are all dwarves into fucking mining and shit, like that kind of stuff. I think that stuff's kind of cool. It can be. It says things about your world, and so on a setting by setting basis, I think that stuff definitely has a place. I think the more interesting ones are the mechanics, the core game mechanic level limitations that are imposed on all characters. Things like how what is the ratio between your hit points and the average sword damage, or how long does it take to go up a level, things like that. Yeah, I'm rambling right now. Sorry.
Well, I mean, taking what I heard from Clayton, that you make some good distinctions. I think that when it comes to the character builds and their major proficiencies, it's nice to have a system that allows people to have their own distinctness. I think of like Deadlands. If anybody who played the Deadlands series, if you were a shaman or you played a Native American that had magical powers, that was the only way you could get those things, and that was your uniqueness. But I think that the systems that usually I think we all kind of dislike, or the worst, that's okay. That kind of genre style limitation, I prefer that. But the best systems, kind of like what you were alluding to, they don't trap you in the rules, like you said, something that's commonsensical. Should I be able to pick up, how do I don't have a weapon. I'm going to pick up this rock and toss it at this guy's head. Anyone should be able to do that. And it should not be difficult to allow that to happen in the games. But there are systems out there where, that is essentially a waste of a turn and no one would do the most commonsensical thing in a situation. It seems like first edition, the earlier editions, what are some other systems that are very open to that? Do you think that leads to overrule, like those gigantic rule books of rules that adjudicate every situation? Apocalyptia is very open and allows you to do just about whatever you want to do. What other systems? What are some good good contrast examples? I'm trying to think. What would be a very limited rule system versus a very open one? What game systems?
I would say pretty much any system that doesn't rely on classes is going to have that distinction of limitation that you're talking about, where it's not just a pre-prescribed thing that this particular style of character can do this particular set of things. I think that most classless systems, be it like GURPS or a lot of White Wolf games or my favorite Savage Worlds, I think those all have a lot of it's very open as to what a particular character can do. And in a lot of those games, those still are very rules crunchy systems. And like in particular Savage Worlds, the book for Savage Worlds really isn't all that long compared to other game systems, like particularly like Deluxe Edition. The core rule book was 200 pages, if that, and it was a smaller sized book, like physically smaller sized book than a lot of role playing games books are. So you can have game rule systems that are shorter and more concise than D&D that still have a lot of that openness to them. And Jordan, Apocalyptia, if you like, whenever you've printed it out, yeah, it is definitely a lot shorter than the D&D rule book. But there's still a lot of crunch there, and there's still a lot of like just rules on on how the characters can do things, rather than rules on what they can and cannot do. It's all the focus on the rules, whether the rules focus on prescribing what can be done versus prescribing how to do things.
Yeah, that's an interesting tonal decision that different game designers take. I've noticed some people like to emphasize, here's the things that you can do as a player character, and here's the formula for it or whatever. Whereas other ones seem to be a lot more like, oh yeah, you can totally do anything except these things over here, and if you're not to, this tier and blah, blah, blah. Different books will go back and forth in their tone, even within the text. But Yeah, I think I tend to prefer the first version. And that's not to say that the first version is entirely unlimited. It's more like here's your list of options. Build what you want out of that. That's okay. But it's still gonna progress at a certain order. There's still gonna be some logical coherence between things. It's a fine line, because like at what point is the game designer forcing their game to be played in a certain way? I think I resist that level of draconian imposition onto the table personally.
So when talking about limitations too, are we considering a limitation? Our original conversation seems to imply that we did, that limitations also reflect like how the power curve is in a game. So like for instance in the game we're playing now, something that I think most games that I've interacted with in the last my experience has moved away from what first edition did, which is say when you're crafting a dungeon, say, or a series of encounters, either as a game designer, so if you're reading it in a book, or if you're doing it as your own GM, there's a lot of consideration towards balance, and here are your players, this is what they can do power-wise, or this is kind of roughly how strong they are. And then you kind of craft something that is achievable, whereas in more, I guess, more limited games or lethal games, there's like little consideration to that. That running away is a perfectly good option. That it's very knowing at all times that what you're going to find around the corner isn't necessarily going to be something that you can just brute force defeat. Is that also kind of what we're talking about here with limitations? Because when it comes to that really affects party. Like, because I think about Deadlands, because Deadlands is just a game I played a lot, and its power curve is very like small because the characters that you build and run from the get-go are a lot closer to the strongest version that character will ever be than, say, in D&D, whereas when you have a leveled system, you start off level 1, you're essentially a peon. Usually by the time you get to 5, especially 10 or whatever, you're very powerful. And so your ability to do stuff and the type of things you can take on, whereas is immense, very different from earlier levels. Whereas in Deadlands, encounters that are deadly on session 1 are more than likely still going to be very deadly on session 20. It seems like D&D first editions are very much like that too. It seems to me that for first edition, once we level, or we will start to feel a little more empowered. Is that kind of limit? How do you guys deal with those types of limitations when you have a game that can be very deadly at early levels?
Well, I firmly believe that the onus should be on the player characters to know thyself and know thy limitations and size up a situation. Be cautious. Don't bite off more than you can chew if you can help it, and just be very judicious in how you approach things. I really am just completely over the 5th edition design philosophy of building stuff that's meant to be easily defeated. What's the fucking point? I'm so bored of 5th edition for that exact reason. And the whole idea of challenge ratings is kind of a farce and always has been. How much fun are you really having when you go into a situation and know that, it's going to get really close, but we've, worked out the math that it's going to take, exactly 75% of our collective resources, but by golly, we're going to come out on top. Like, come on. What a contrived close call.
I think 5th edition's very guilty as charged of that very phenomenon. It leads to a lot of boredom. It's very difficult, I feel like, for the DM to overcome that in a good way.
even in 5th edition, I feel like the low levels are still very much that idea. If you are being a stickler for the rules, D&D 5th edition is still pretty damn lethal at low levels. Like 1 and 2 are, you're going to have characters drop, and I have had a couple of characters die in 5th edition where they have just bled out before anyone has gotten to them. And I've probably had more characters in 5th edition die from that than I had in even 3rd edition.
How much time do you spend at those low levels, though? I mean, you get to first level at, what, 300 XP or something? Like, that's a session or two. Like, once you get into that level 3 tier where you get your archetype stuff and all that, like, you're off like a rocket ship at that point.
How many people really want to spend that many sessions at level 1, level 2, level 3, just not having the core things that make your character class what you envision as that character? I know personally, I don't like to have the concept of what my character will be, and the game have to last so long in order to actually feel like I'm actually playing that class. Like I don't like, in particularly very slow progression editions of D&D, where it takes forever for me to get up to the point where I can consistently cast one spell in each combat that we happen to be in a particular day. I just don't feel like I'm playing a wizard until I can cast at least one spell reliably cast one spell in each combat that we are in.
Yeah, I think spellcasters are really where that problem lies that you're talking about there. For the other classes, I would submit that that feeling of having made it as your character is largely an illusion created by whatever it is that you're fighting. You know, it's always a relative comparison. How badass is my fighter? It's how many of fill-in-the-blank bad guys I can kill. Are those fill-in-the-blank bad guys kobolds, or are they bugbears, or are they ogres? Like, you know, so that gets to be sort of a hamster wheel kind of thing for the fighter comparison. But you definitely are right about casters. But I mean, here's where we get into what is it they call it, the linear fighter and the exponential wizard. Is that what they call it? Yeah, like, I guess this is another point about limitations. What do you guys think? I think clearly, Clayton, you're not all that for it, but I have a sense of accomplishment when I've made it to a new level with a slow burn kind of XP trickle sort of game like this. And, you know, when you guys come across, you know, a 4th, 5th, 6th level character, especially if it's a wizard, since they cost so much more to level up, you know, that says something. That's, I mean, for those who don't know, in original D&D, like White Box, I think they statted out class levels up to maybe like around 10th or so, and then they give you like, you know, and then plus whatever per level beyond this, and didn't really give like an upper cap, but like it seemed like 10th level was thought of back then sort of how we think of 20th level now, I feel. But I don't know, Clayton, when you get to the point where you can cast 3 magic missiles in a row, like sequentially, not as, you know, one cast, are you going to feel like, fuck, I've really got something here?
I don't know, because on the one hand, I would have to be pretty high level in order to cast magic missile on 3 consecutive rounds, if that's what you're describing. Or are you talking about just having 3 come out whenever I cast? Okay, yeah, that's going to be so far down the line that I can't even see that. I can't even see that milestone for my character from where I'm currently sitting, because 3 level 1 spells in one combat, I can't even fathom for my character being able to be powerful enough in order to cast that. I can't conceive of my character surviving long enough to be that kind of a wizard.
You know, a thought occurred to me that's adjacent to what you guys are talking about, but you know, we'll call them limited deadly settings. In a very limited system where characters are easily susceptible to danger. And this is even true for the low level DM, you know, the low level D&D like we were talking about earlier. And it's proving to be very true, I think, of the classic D&D we're playing now, is that when you're choosing your system and you put your players in a world, in a game that says that death is familiar and that it's very possible, maybe more so in this system than others, watch out guys. The one thing that we're experiencing a little bit right now is the paralysis of, I don't want to endanger my character, which can be fun. People need to, you know, not be total murder hobos. So that limitations are important for that reason. But just like in the real world, then, like, what does it take you? And I'm asking both of you, what would it take you both to actually put yourself in harm's way? I mean, really, is greed enough? What exactly do people put themselves in danger for?
Yeah, it's typically their loved ones, and you know, the self-defense kind of situations, and that's about it. If you have a really strong ideological thing or an economic reason, you know, someone might join the military, but even then, I don't think most people, unless they're joining the Marine Corps during wartime, are really expecting to get out into the shit. They're expecting to, you know, sit on an aircraft carrier on a base or something like that and put in their time. But
that's my point exactly, is that when you have a system that, I'll just say, discourages heroic behavior, because the system is closer to reality as far as its lethality goes, it's very incumbent upon the DM. Well, I mean, I guess it's not really, but in my mind it would be that the stakes of the narrative would have to be very high, and that, you know, you need to be thinking in terms of, and I don't mean I mean, but just the DM, the listener, whatever. If you're choosing a system that is very limited, has very limited players and their abilities when compared to the rest of the world, they have to have a really bought-in reason to be putting themselves in this danger. And I would even say that it needs to be more even than self-defense, because running away is not heroic. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what you say, Jordan. I don't play games to run away. I run away in real life. You know what I mean? I don't love being in a position where the best opportunity is to run away. And so my natural, and I would say most people who sit down at the table, our natural inclinations are to confront the danger head on, and to do that knowing that you very well could die. You know, the player, that there does have to be a real strong push. There needs to be a pull forward, be it time sensitivity or something like that, or just, you know, you got 5 days till the princess dies or whatever to get through this maze or whatever. I think that when the players don't have a driving motor to push them into danger, you tend to get a whole lot of cowardice and hesitation on the part of your party, and it can limit their ability to get through a narrative or get to the next milestone for the DM. You know, and also it can just be, frankly, it just becomes too real lifey to me. It's like, you know, I don't want to run away, is what I'm saying. And even though I also think there needs to be limitations to check the players against being total stupid, you know, being dummies, I do think sometimes players who are in systems that are very limited need a real magnetic storyline to pull them through. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that So this comes up a little bit in these old games. Like it's not directly explicit. In some places it is, depending on where Gary Gygax is writing. But you're given the impression, and the whole like setup around it is that the adventurer personality is a special breed. They're adrenaline junkies. They're treasure seekers. They're wild asses that, live fast and die young and whatever. If they were playing it safe, they would have just taken up farming on the family plot, or been shit shovelers or whatever the fuck. There's something in your character that has rejected that safe path, and so it's high risk, high reward. That's the life you live, and that's why XP is tied to gold acquisition in early D&D. It's precisely that Conan the Barbarian thing of, fuck yeah, we broke into the temple, fuck yeah, we got the shit, we get out, we're fucking living it up, we're buying sweet armor, we're getting wasted, blowing all our money until the next adventure comes along, because now we're broke. That goes back to the fucking Alexander Dumas stuff, the Three Musketeers. That's exactly how all those books go. Part of it is like, did you make a character that is signed up to adventure, or did you make a character that should have been a farmer? You know what I mean?
No, I do agree. It's just that I've just observed throughout my days of playing that the problem that I don't think Gygax maybe, and he probably didn't even care, and I'm sure he didn't care, but as the game has gone on, I think it's evolved in a more weighted towards the player bend, I guess we could say, simply because you have a bunch of farmers and shit shovelers sitting around a table playing a game together. And so even though we're all wanting to release that inner hero, it doesn't take long for those real life instincts to kick in, and you start to play conservative. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think that it can be overcame. I don't think just saying from the outset, well, you're at the table to be you're an adventurer. Get into an adventurer's mindset. I just don't think that that's enough to drive the story in and of itself, or to push a group of players into a dangerous situation just because that's their personality type. Because if they do, then they turn into what happens to my character, who very much I tried to play him exactly the way you described, and he died.
There is a funny little comic in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. And this kind of speaks to the weirdness of early D&D. You'd never see this in modern D&D. But there's straight up almost like a Far Side style newspaper comic strip that's just a one panel thing. This is page 111 of my copy, and what you see is like a little Friar Tuck looking guy and two guys that kind of look like wizards, and one guy that looks like a warrior with a horned helmet, and they're sitting around a table. The wizard's throwing some dice, they've got pencils and paper and stuff. The caption says, "It's a great new fantasy role-playing game. We pretend we're workers and students in an industrialized and technological society." And the priest is holding a book that says "Papers and Paychecks."
Lol.
But yeah, that is definitely a huge difference between modern D&D and classic D&D, is that like I was saying, the emphasis is on the character, making it things about your character. The whole world kind of seems like shaped to service your character in some way. It's like a holodeck program. Whereas in the old way, it was, you're dropped into this situation that if you take the safe path and do what your fathers and fathers did, you're going to be the same fucking peasant that they were. Or you can, grab destiny by the balls and see what you can pull out of this ancient treasure hoard and, maybe become a lord, maybe become a archmage, who knows.
Yeah, but in order to actually achieve that, I don't know what I'm trying to say, because I do like I would prefer to be closer to the lethal end of the scale, like in games in general. Even though I've always only ran D&D typically, in general, when I sit down to play, I also get that super boredom when things seem to be unbeatable, or when your player's characters seem to be unbeatable. But that being said, I mean those first edition games, I mean, they rewarded you for acting that way by killing you. You know what I mean? Like, you can say what you want about what, they could write a preface all they want that says, now remember, boys, you're heroes. Go act like heroes. Go throw caution into the wind. But, oftentimes, you do that, and then you get zapped by the invincible creature or whatever that you should have ran away from. Doesn't really encourage you to do that.
What we're talking around here is the like sane middle ground, which is a party that takes danger seriously, that scouts carefully, that checks for traps, that approaches things as if their life is on the line, and then when they have a reasonable plan in place, after they've gathered resources, after they've, accumulated whatever it is that they need to do, they've effectively used their retainers for support and so on and so forth. Only then, if you can't figure out any other way around violence, then strike with some kind of advantage against your foe. Most of early D&D, you're incentivized to sneak around a lot and try to make out with as much gold as you possibly can, while you've cleverly somehow bamboozled the goblins into fighting with the orcs from two opposite sides of the cave system. And like that kind of like hoodwink and goodbye is the pretty much the prescribed approach for most of the stuff that I've read so far. The emphasis is definitely on clever daring, I'll say.
Which is why I'm glad I have a new character now. Because what else does a plate mail wielding, dawning, I should say, giant sword wielding, character to do when they don't have when they have those insurmountable odds? And I'm not complaining because my character died. I'm totally fine with that, and I'm glad that he did, and he did exactly what he should have, and all that good stuff. But I will say I see that as kind of a flaw in the system. Is that it? It's like that. If you choose to be a fighting man, the road to most fun probably isn't to just immediately load up on the loudest, heaviest armor and feel like your sword is your first option.
I suspect I might have colored your guys' experience of this a little bit by making your first major battle one with a creature that you could not take toe to toe, and because of the circumstances, you guys were in a hallway and it was just you facing the troll, and that's pretty much the only factors at play, and you simply weren't high enough level or had good enough magic items to be able to withstand that. I think you might feel a little bit differently about it had that instead been like a few orcs for you to wail through or something like that. I don't know. That's just me speculating. But if it's come down to, the fighting man is squaring off against, some big creature, multiple hit die higher than his level, something's gone wrong for sure. Something in the plan has completely fallen through, assuming there was a plan to begin with. This is one of the reasons why in so many of these early dungeons, something like a third of the rooms are empty, and in all the guidance for how to create your own dungeon, it says leave a bunch of empty rooms, because it's assuming that you guys are basically spelunking with monsters around, and that, every few rooms or whatever, you guys are boarding up the door, doing what you can to barricade the place, trying to get a little bit of rest and recover, and then push on into the next thing. And, kind of have like a base that you're sort of moving in and out of as you go. I guess there's just a lot of like dungeon expeditionary planning and skills that have fallen out of normal D&D play in the last couple of editions that are now things that you guys are going to have to kind of relearn as a party, I guess.
And that makes sense. Yeah, it's a tough issue because, I mean, as Clayton was kind of alluding to earlier, is that given an appropriate approach by the DM, this whole conversation is irrelevant because you can absolutely make a 5th edition game just as daunting as any other edition. And on the contrary, you can make a system like Apocalyptia or maybe original D&D, whatever. You can make it like, I feel like if I was running your game, Jordan, it would be similarly as not deadly as my game in 5th edition was, which was I completely admit that I do not do I just personally don't run combats well. I don't design combats well, and I personally don't love combat in general. So like the idea, so I never really want to kill a player or allow them to die. So I think that just a lot of this too is style in how you choose to DM. Does that make sense? It's just there are certain systems that cater to certain DM types, I think, more than others. If Jordan wants to run a game that feels like the one you're running, but is set in 5th edition, you're going to have to bend the system to that end, which will probably chafe you, thus make you want to not have a good opinion of the system. But that's another part of this conversation we really haven't touched on, is that, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, it's how do you choose to run your game that determines whether or not the system is lethal in its limitations. Does that make sense?
To some extent. So yeah, in modern D&D, they assume that the dungeon master is a fan of the players, and that the dungeon master takes on this role that is more like a director of a movie, and that you're sort of there to set up these set pieces to make the player characters look like badasses for this great scene. It's got that cinematic kind of feel to it. You're talking about the art in a episode before last. Every depiction of characters is like them triumphing over something. In the old ones, the old books, it's them like maybe half of them are like sneaking around. Maybe they're fighting something. Some of them are getting fucked up. Maybe somebody's about to die and doesn't even know it. Like it's often images of people in the shit and like fighting for their lives or something terrible's about to happen.
I think that really speaks to the fact that all of those original gamers, they built their base on war games, and their love of, and that was the innovation that D&D brought to it. Was, if anything, D&D almost, like, to a war gamer, D&D would probably look like 5th edition does to us playing 1st edition, where they, like, it definitely was meant to bring the scope in, pinpoint it, and give you more buy-in on, like, instead of having like these meticulously made figurines that represent large groups, those things would die like crazy. And so they were used to lethality being just a big huge part of it, that everybody is, you have to be careful, it's a strategy game. Whereas I think D&D has grown into, it's not really, is D&D really much of a strategy game? I mean, it isn't 1st edition.
There's no need for a strategy when the math is so entirely in your favor most of the time that, simple probability is going to work out the foregone conclusion of your victory.
I feel, though, that, like, the kind of what you're talking about is the implication that just because D&D 5th edition has this challenge rating system, that you absolutely have to follow it. Whereas in, like first edition, there was no such system beyond just the fact that certain monsters give out more experience points. That was the only, quote, balancing system that was built into the system. In 5th edition, if you ignored the challenge ratings and just threw encounters at the players without calculating that type of thing, I think you would have almost the exact same type of situations where sometimes the players would be way in over their heads and have to retreat, and other times they would be in a situation where they can just go in and take care of business.
There's a different approach that players took in the olden days when it came to big monsters, high hit die things. From what I can tell, it was something like casing the joint, where if somebody found out that there was a dragon up in the mountain, it wasn't like necessarily, oh, we're terrified of the dragon, or like, let's go up there and kill the thing because we know we can because we've hit 10th level and we ought to be doing stuff like that by now. But it was more like, man, that thing's worth a lot of XP. It's got to have a lot of treasure. How can we fuck that thing up? And then they, plan some kind of like Ocean's 11 type infiltration sort of thing to figure out how to beat that creature if they wanted to kill it for its XP, or trap the creature. That was a thing that just doesn't happen anymore in the in the OD&D monster book, Monsters and Treasures, I think it's called. Under Dragons, there's a long section of rules for how to subdue a dragon, and you basically break its will and make it your pet or mount or whatever. And it's got all these interesting mechanics about, like, you don't really know how long that domination's gonna last, and is this thing gonna fucking cook you the moment it senses weakness, and like, all this interesting shit. But like, I don't know, there's nothing like that anymore. And I think the player approach to monsters is much more like, okay, here's the next little exciting event for the moment. Let's have this like rote combat, blah, blah, blah. It's supposed to last so many turns. Again, it's going to take such and such a percentage of my resources. Like, Jesus Christ. This is supposed to be more immersive. This is more character driven than like, your wild ambitions. Like, come on.
Well, a lot of games that are run that I played in are some variation of every game is usually taking the ring to Mordor. So in a lot of the games I've played, simple self-interest or personal glory and advancement isn't necessarily the primary goal, whereas it seems like in original D&D it very much was assumed that and in certain game systems, we keep going back to OD&D, but there are a lot of games where, why would I sit around and trap a dragon or care about my status in the society whenever there's imminent doom, or the curse or the lich or whatever to go defeat?
Yeah, I can promise you guys with this campaign, there is no ring, there is no Mordor. There are liches, and they've been around for thousands of years, and the world's gone on just fine. You guys are doing stuff for you, and that's the way I think the game was supposed to be played. The rest of this stuff is it feels like a big circle jerk to me. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys about that I'm still kind of waffling around on is speaking of the kind of world building limitations, what do you guys think about racial class limits? Do you guys have any strong feelings about those one way or the other?
I generally don't really care for racial limits on classes. I do like stat limitations on classes. I'm waffling on whether or not how I feel about racial level limits as well, as to whether or not I think those are accept, like, those are a good idea or not. I mean, the lore reason why they exist is just so that you don't have every single community, like whether it is elf or orc or whatever, having a representation of every single class that is available in their society. I like that lore, and I would really like for the lore to be reflective of the rules. But then as a player, I don't like the fact that I cannot be the exception to the established lore of the world.
Pretty much completely agree with you, Clayton. I like for a system, I personally don't mind having stat disadvantages to break out of the mold. So I don't care at all to play, an elf, say, if I'm going to make a fighter, and, not necessarily have a stat bonuses that's going to help me there, or whatever the example. I can't think of a good example right now, but I don't mind. I think that I don't like it if they're just completely not allowed. I think you're referencing first edition where they limit the classes that the races can play, Jordan. I don't like that at all.
Yeah, that happens like from the very beginning up through second edition. There are certain classes that only certain races can play, and then furthermore, there are level caps for how high certain races can go in certain classes. So like to start with, halflings actually could only be fighters in the first book, and then the Greyhawk supplement came out, which introduced thieves, and then they were allowed to be thieves as well. There's some weird stuff in there about elves, of course, where they're kind of fighters, kind of magic users, and then there's these like weird passages about like there are elf clerics, but the player characters can't play them for some reason. I get the sense from that early stuff that they weren't really sure what they meant by level yet. Like how they were going to balance all these things. It seemed like they had all these different variables that they were trying to balance together, and like a first level elf in OD&D is just straight up objectively better than a first level human of whatever sort. They just have more things going on and they're more powerful. But then over time, much like the disparity between wizards and fighters or whatever, the thought is that would balance out. And you're absolutely right, Clayton. Like the thought seems to have been like, well, okay, elves live for 500 years, 1,000 years, whatever. Why isn't the entire world run by some huge cabal of like 20th level elves, probably wizards, that just have a lock on everything? Like, well, it's because there's they've got a limit to their level, and I've kicked that around, why, like, justifications for why that might work, and some of them are kind of interesting, I think, but like overall it seems like they thought they had to do something, otherwise some of these demi-humans are just like clearly the only choice to make, and I feel like that's kind of where we gotten back to with 5e as well.
It's funny because I almost always I still think the human is perfectly good.
I tend to play humans, but I don't like to play humans. The reason why I tend to play humans in particularly modern games is I like for in some way our party to in some way represent the racial diversity of the world itself. Who are the civilized races? And the reason why I end up playing a human in the majority of my games is just because there are no other humans in the party. Everybody wants to play some class that is like out of a splat book, or something that is they think is not the quote boring human. And I love playing other races, but the majority of the races that I end up playing are human, just because I want the lore of the world to in some way be reflected in the party composition.
I really appreciate that about you, Clayton. That's also my tastes for a party makeup. I like to see a pretty good spread of different people, and but at the same time, there's something that makes me roll my eyes when I look at a party and it's made up of, like you were saying, nothing but these like really fringe, like weird sub races and subclasses, and like everybody's fucking snowflakes and whatever. It's I like a well-rounded group of people that seems plausible. Did you say something, Eliot?
Yeah, I was just joking. I threw in when you were talking about random eye-rolling classes. I mentioned Warforged because there was a previous conversation we had where I talked about my dislike of Warforged, and I felt like you both clutched your pearls a little bit.
I have a soft spot for the Warforged. I'll admit that. They're not going to show up in my OD&D game, though.
I mean, they are cool, but I think that I just think they're one of those classes, one of those races that it's like, oh yeah, you want to be a robot, huh? There weren't robots in Lord of the Rings.
As far as classes go, do you guys feel starved for choices? I mean, we're playing with the four basic races of dwarf, elf, human, and halfling, and the four basic classes of mage, priest, rogue, and warrior. There's ways to throw in, things like paladins and druids and monks and stuff like that, but a lot of those have a limitation that you have to just have happened to have rolled high abilities and certain high scores in certain abilities in order to qualify for those. But we're running 8 players, and so there's obviously going to be plenty of overlap. But do you guys feel crowded out in your skill stats, or like you're having a hard time distinguishing yourselves from each other at all?
Well, as the only magic user in the group, I wouldn't say I feel like there's a lack of diversity in the group, but because in the style that we are playing, I don't think it's going to matter as much whether we have a party full of fighters or whether or not we have one cleric or 2 clerics. I don't think in the scheme of things, at least for a very long time in the campaign, I don't think it's really going to make that much of a difference.
Now that's interesting, because what that tells me is that there's some kind of inverse relationship between the complexity of the game system and how important it is for people to kind of stay in their lane. Because as you guys have said before about playing like this, you seem to feel like you're much more free to just say you're doing something and then let me work out how the rules are supposed to adjudicate that. But if you guys had, here's my second level set of rogue abilities, here's my first level set of fighter abilities, whatever. I think you guys would have felt more crowded. Is that wrong?
I think you are accurate, like where you become much more sensitive to any overlap if there is basically a very built-in wide variety of things that are available. Like if you have a very wide array of abilities that you can have, and one person has a duplicate ability, I feel like that is felt in the game a whole lot more than if there's only a few options and we go into it knowing that there's going to be 2 or 3 fighters and there's not going to be all that much mechanical difference between them except for their ability score arrays. I think it's just a difference in expectations.
I usually don't have that problem too much in games in general. The number of people in the game directly affects whether or not people are going to have their toes stepped on. I don't really feel like that's the case in this game, which is a surprise because we do have a lot of players and they do seem to have a lot of overlapping skills. But in the general, I haven't noticed it as an issue.
All right, what do you say we transition on to geek things? All right, I'll go ahead and go first. I've been playing a game called Dungeoneers. It is a video game that is made by Rogue Sword Strategy and Adventure Games. It is currently a free-to-play browser-based dungeon crawl game that uses a little bit of tactical combat thrown into it. I'll have a link to the page where you can play the game in the show notes, but I would say if you like old school kind of dungeon crawly type games, give this a try. It definitely scratches an itch.
I'll go next, I guess. I'm going to shout out a book, How to Draw Fantasy Art and RPG Maps by a character named Jared Blando. It was just a random Christmas gift I got a couple of years ago from my wife, and it was something I didn't know that I liked so much, but over the last 2 years, I have used this book constantly as a reference on improving my map making skills. I just enjoy making maps for fantasy games. Usually the games I run or build are, they stem from a map I drew. Now I just kind of draw maps for fun. Whether I do anything with them or not is beside the point, because I just find it so fun. And a big part of it is that this book really does a great job. Anybody who likes to draw maps and needs maps to flesh out their world and doesn't like their current level of ability, grab that book. It's like $20 off Amazon. It's great. Yeah, I highly recommend it. It should be in any gamer's library.
Okay, so I got one. Actually, I got two. One of them is a podcast that I've been listening to a lot lately. It's on old D&D modules and reviewing them. It's got one of the best podcast titles I've ever heard. It's called Fear of a Black Dragon. It's great. They do a deep dive on all kinds of stuff, many things I'm probably going to run. I would definitely check that out if you're looking for a analysis of old school modules. The other thing is a TV show. It's a mini-series, an animated mini-series that I somehow missed when this first came out. So this is something I've been sleeping on for years now. But it's called Over the Garden Wall. It's this real weird little cartoon. The main character is voiced by Elijah Wood, and some of the other voice acting talent includes Christopher Lloyd, John Cleese, Tim Curry. So pretty good set of stars for this show. But it's got this weird style that it makes me think of some kind of like Americana folklore. It evokes, Sleepy Hollow or Mark Twain, like something like that. There's some kind of mythological thread that goes back to this early New England kind of weirdness. And there's horror elements to it. There's fantasy elements to it. It's straight up adorable. It's the weirdest thing. I'm not usually into stuff like this, but I watched this and just got fucking obsessed. So Over the Garden Wall, worth a look. It's very, very odd and charming.
All right, guys. What do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Let's do it.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.